Rangatira tēnā koutou. Kua tai mai ki te tautoko te kaupapa o te rā, nō reira tēnā rā koutou katoa. Welcome to our reconvened Risk and Assurance Committee meeting. Delighted that you're all here. Do we have any apologies? No. Declarations of interest? Marvellous. Public forum, petitions and deputations. I haven't been made aware of any, so we'll keep moving. And confirmation of minutes of the 28th of September. Thank you. Any? Somebody like to second those, please?
Happy to second, Madam Chair.
Chairman Horrell, any discussion on those? Seems like a long time ago. I'll put that motion in. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. I've had no notification of extraordinary or urgent business, and I've had no questions so far, which takes us to the chairman and councillors' reports. Do we have any reports from councillors? Want to cover that off? No. We might put later to Amy, Bruce and I attended a webinar run by the Office of the Auditor General, as I used to do last term. And this one was particularly relevant because it was about national cyber security, and speaking to Lisa Fong, hearing from, not speaking to, who bombarded us with a heap of information, but we'll update you about that relevant stuff for us later. So item 9 is the election of deputy chair to the committee. And as you can see from the item in your agenda, it's pretty straightforwardish, I think. Do we have any nominations?
Yeah, I'd like to nominate you back. Councillors, I don't know.
Do I need to step away from
Yeah, I
this?
was just going to say, what's the appropriate?
You need to run this pitch.
I'm sure actually. What question is?
We need to elect a deputy chair, and Councillor McPhail is nominating me.
The deputy chairman of this, obviously, can we do that? Because we are going to elect
Because
an
we,
independent chair.
yeah.
Future. So, which I would say that natural progression would be Lynn to be deputy of this committee.
Right. Do not to
How do we work that one out?
this matter until you actually do both.
Yep, you could do
Good.
that.
Because we are
Next meeting.
progressing at the moment with this existing
Okay.
arrangement. I think let's just do it one, shall we?
Yes.
Well, I'm happy
Works
to
for me.
move that recommendation.
That we defer the item.
until When we
Yeah.
have a.
Thank you, Chairman. It makes it much more comfortable for me. Thank you. So, moving swiftly on, we go to item 10.1, which is part of the General Manager's corporate report. The proposed terms of reference for the new committee that will henceforth be known as the Risk and Assurance Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I will take the item as read. Obviously, this is a new committee. It has been formed from what was previously the organisation performance, and I'll never remember what the A stands for. That one. And so, you know, specifically focusing on risk and assurance, that, you know, this has been part of our risk journey as an organisation and long overdue. You might recall, for those who were here in the previous triennium, that the OPAC committee was split into two separate focuses, but we've now, one being risk and one being finance and performance, but we've now split that out into separate committees. The proposed terms of reference that have been drafted here, and it is a draft, and you know, for discussion and comment, has been drafted with reference not only to the Office of the Auditor General recommendations, and I put paper in your pack to show the background to that, but also with reference to what some of the other councils did. So we did a desktop exercise looking at audit and risk committee terms of references in other organisations, and I also had an opportunity to run that past our independent member, Bruce Robertson, as well. So I'll take the report as read, but would just invite any commentary or feedback to the terms of reference. Any questions?
Councillor McLeod.
I was reasonably happy with, I was trying to work out what's not covered and what's things like that. So I was going through, trying to understand it, and well, it should cover most issues that will arise. So I was pretty happy with it.
Well, my question was a bit, still a bit in the dark, really, to be honest. Maybe it's my recent bugginess, but I just wonder, when looking at the forward work program, for example, it'd be quite good to get some examples of actual things that might come up. And specific, can we get some examples of what specifically might happen, for example, under enterprise risks, for example? Enterprise risk, what kind of things are they?
Organisation-wide risks, those will be the things that we will be talking about strategically in terms of those things we've identified in our risk register. So they affect the entire organisation. Typically, those will be things that might prevent us from achieving our outcomes. So that can be anything to do with our relationships to our stakeholders, to our ability to secure or maintain a level of funding commensurate to the work that we are required to do, both from a regulatory point of view and also on behalf of our community. It could be everything from having a natural disaster to anything that might impact on the confidence of the community towards us. So we have been, and I alluded to it before, I mean, we have been on a risk journey. We've had quite low levels of risk maturity as an organisation, and as part of us building our maturity, we have this year been able to recruit a risk and internal assurance officer, and that's Tanya, who's sitting in the back of the room, and she has, in fact, I think it was your second or third day, she worked with council to help run a workshop to identify what the key risks are, and she's been busy progressing that program of work. So those will be things that we'll be talking about on a regular basis. And I refer to that in I think it's the third item that we're talking about, which is our proposed activity plan for the year. But that's sort of what we mean by enterprise risk.
So whereabouts do things like our preparedness for a natural disaster come in? Like think about the stop banks on the Mataura River near Cornwall, for example. Is that something that this committee would be looking at, or is that the job of some other committee? Maybe, because if you had a big flood that caused a whole lot of damage there, then this council could be accused of not being prepared properly, for example. So do we look at those sorts of things?
I mean, I'd argue it was all about the context, if you like. So when we're talking about risk, is it the risk that we're not meeting our infrastructure strategy? Is it the risk that we're not meeting our contract to the community? Is it the risk that we don't have the resources or the funding to, maintain or repair as fast as we can? Is it the risk that, we don't have contingency plans? I think it all depends on the context. If it's pure, it's if it is also about, hey, what is the progress on these matters and how we're reporting performance against plan, that's would sit in a different committee. So again, it really depends on how we're framing up the question that you want to answer, whether it will come to this committee or sit at another.
Bruce, I see, welcome Bruce. We're just discussing the examples. Morris has asked about examples of how the audit committee work program might actually look. So would you like to illuminate us?
Thank you, Lyndall, and my apologies for my lateness. Probably my organisation that caused that problem. I apologise. Look, Lyndall, great discussion, and I came in just as I heard Amy talk about our risk maturity and the undoubted efforts that have kicked off to upgrade our response to risk, particularly through an audit and risk committee, which is great news. And I appreciate the fact that as I leave, you've asked me to make certain that actually occurs. So I'm glad to say I'm working closely with Tanya in that process. Morris, you've got a very good question. And in terms of understanding where OPAC got to prior to the end of the last triennium, we did meet to discuss our big risks, our top 10 risks, our strategic risks, whatever you want to call them. And that was the first attempt by OPAC, or in fact by all council, to try and define what it considered were those things that the Audit and Risk Committee should actually be concerned about. So indeed, just in terms of the cycle, Tanya and I are working on those. We're working through a meeting with the exec team on the 19th of this month with the view that we can then bring fully formed risks back to indeed OPAC and a workshop so that they can become the basis for monitoring on a quarterly basis the big risks that ES involves. That's the long answer. And actually, so it's for the committee ultimately with council to determine what are the risks that it monitors. And I think your question is a very good one. So I'm stalling to say, let's get that back in front of you folk to work through that actually what are the top risks that so far are being worked through senior management and indeed OPAC are the ones that you would consider as the new committee as being the ones that you should monitor. I think actually natural disaster is a key one for any council, including a regional council in particular, to deal with. And you've hit the nail on the head with ones like the Mataura River.
Thanks, Bruce. I've got Wilma and Chairman Horrell, if you don't mind. Chairman, I'll take Wilma first. Thanks.
So, Morris, the question is absolutely bang on the money. The matter relating to the stock banks, particularly in Mataura and Gore, was such a serious risk for us when we received the initial information from our engineers that we did bring that to the subcommittee that is formed to enable us as officers to take action between these quarterly meetings. So that's a very good example of something that we would bring and say, yes, that is a risk and how we are going to manage that. And if there were needs, and there was in that case, for council to agree ahead of us putting the funding through Kānoa to allow me to spend money in order to actually progress mitigating that risk with a reasonable sense that we would then get the funding from central government, which we did. So that's exactly how we use the committee.
Thank you. Chairman Horrell.
Just carrying on with the conversation, we found last term that the old OPAC committee had actually become probably one of the more comprehensive committees we had, and it took quite a long time to get through an agenda. So the decision has been made to split off the financial risk, which obviously lies with the council. We've had encouragement from the Auditor General to have an independent chair for this type of committee. I always felt that it depends who we've got sitting around the table, and we had great input from Bruce. I don't think we've made a lot of difference this time. I think probably it is time to have somebody in that role, but obviously, this will put my hand up because of your question. And some of these things like Mataura programs, we're probably going to OT committee would go to regional services that have got flood problems as part of their thing, but because it's risk, it'll also come to this committee, and that's why we went through the very comprehensive process of having meetings to inform the public before Christmas that we were trying to ascertain how large the risk was, and so definitely those sorts of things will come to this committee.
Thanks, Chairman. Just as a comment from me also, we often talk about reputational risk around the table. And so the risk framework actually covers off, more than just flood banks, not just more than flood banks. It covers off the likes of cybersecurity, health and safety, reputational risk, those kinds of things. So having that independent lead in those conversations, I think, is really important, because it would, I don't have the expertise to lead those conversations, but I'm happy to learn from somebody who's in the mentor space. So it's also got opportunity for all of us to learn some things from an independent Councillor McPhail, and then we might move on a wee bit.
But I think from as a governance, as we've developed this in the last, I don't know how many years we've been working this, going through this, it's certainly good from a perspective. Actually, we've analysed, trying to work out where all the risks are, and actually having plans in place. So it's from any little, either health and safety, or it's about protecting people and protecting our community. Reputational risk is probably one that I just have an interest in, from a point of, if we get this wrong, what does this mean for a community, any of the decisions we make? But it's actually to work through some of those and actually understand how to deal with them. But it's certainly, from my position, where I sit, is saying I want to know that we've got everything covered, analysed it, just to know that if any of those questions get asked, what do you do about this? Did you know about it? Oh, yes, we did. We've implemented this. We can't protect yourselves from everything, but just trying to make sure we do know where all the risks are. There will certainly more and more will come along as we get down this road.
Madam Chair, sorry to delay.
Yeah, no, you're right.
We were talking about reputational risk, and I think that is something that's a little bit more esoteric but important in the community's eyes, that we are seen to be doing the right thing. So I assume that's something that we were looking at as well. And as an example, I'm thinking of as our attitude to global warming, climate change, that sort of thing, is whether or not we're dragging the chain or leading the pack or keeping up. How are we going to deal with that sort of thing?
That's quite right.
I wish there was an easy answer to that one.
Risk of doing nothing and risk of doing something. So.
Councillor Morrison.
Just in respect of how the terms of reference are framed, and perhaps responding to both that question and the idea that it's a dynamic and increasingly dynamic world we're going to be engaging in, maybe adding a sort of a catch-all additional sentence at the end, or a bullet point or numbered serial, drawing council attention to any other issues that the committee believes may negatively impact attainment of the organisational mission and reports. Might be a way to remind the committee that it may not be on our radar at the moment, but that shouldn't prevent us from anticipating or scanning for additional things. Impact us.
Yeah. I kind of felt that was implicit, but if you feel we need to explicitly say it,
Bruce got his hand up.
Oh, sorry, Bruce.
Yeah, no worries. Look, this is a really rich discussion, and it's a great one to have. Can I say, firstly, and particularly in response to climate change, Morris, the critical question is, what is your vision and objective around climate change? So, firstly, the Risk Committee can only follow the lead of the Council. So it becomes a question of actually, what are your objectives that you want to achieve in that area? Because our risk approach is about actually ensuring that if you've got objectives in certain areas that are key and critical to the mission of Environment Southland, we've got a suitable risk management framework and assurance framework sitting behind that. So you're actually asking a question which is important in terms of council as a whole determining what is its priority around climate change. If you choose that's big, well, yes, I could well imagine that we would need to have an important part of our risk framework devoted to that, but it's going to be determined ultimately by what are the goals, activities, what's the vision that you as a council have in terms of that area. So I suspect that's for a discussion, particularly around the LTP.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. So, Phil, would you like to share your addition with us again, just so that we know that we've got it?
Words to the effect of draw council attention to any other issues that the committee believes may negatively impact attainment of organisational mission and or goals.
Right, everybody okay with that? Chairman Horrell?
I was going to speak for that, and I think that I was looking through the list and thought, you know, your terms of reference, your framework, is there anything missing? So I'm quite comfortable with that sort of addition, because that means if something else comes up, it can come before this committee. So I think it may be covered, but at least that's a catch-all that makes up anything else.
Okay, so I'm accepting that in
Happy to second
recommendation 2 as an as input into the terms of reference. We do have a mover and a seconder, so I might actually move that addition so that it's formalised. So unless there's any further discussion just about that addition, I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Okay, so that takes us back to recommendation 1. We have reviewed the terms of reference. 2, we have provided input. So 3, we can adopt the proposed and or amended terms of reference, or we can agree to reconsider amendments. But I think I get the feeling that we are in agreement that what we've got is sufficient with that amendment. Yes. So are you moving all 3 of those, Jeremy?
3 companies.
Yep, I think so. So just to be clear, recommendation 3 is that we are adopting the amended terms of reference.
Happy to second, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chairman Horrell. All those in favour, please say aye. Yes. Carried. Thank you. Thanks everyone for your input. It's really valuable. I would just add that one of the OAG webinars I attended last year on this matter, the best quote of the day was good. Risk and assurance is not an overhead, it's a value add. I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you. Moving on to item 2, which is the recruitment of an independent chair for the Risk and Assurance Committee.
So we've already had a little bit of discussion on this. It is recommended by the Office of the Auditor General that such committees as this are chaired by an independent member, and Council resolved to do that at its inaugural meeting. So this item really outlines 2 things. One, it has a proposed job description, role description that we would go out and recruit for. And secondly, it also proposes the process by which we would go and do that. So Council already has a policy on recruiting directors for council organisations. And given that it has been some time since we have had a new independent member, the proposal is to go to the market. And the rationale and thinking behind all that is outlined in the papers. So really, once again, interested in this group's feedback on the job description and also any commentary on the process that you would like to undertake to recruit said independent member.
Thanks, Amy. Just a reminder again that there are 4 parts to this recommendation. So if at any stage you feel that we need to take one out separately, please indicate and we can look at that then. But to begin with, you've had a chance to review the role description and the recruitment process proposed. So any comments or questions on that, please?
And sorry, and I do just have an amendment or apologies to number 4. It's actually the council to nominate for councillors. So the recommendation you'll be making would be to go to council for them to recommend the panel members. Yeah, recommend that council nominate.
Everybody clear with that then? Pop council at the beginning of number 4, essentially. Any comments? Perhaps, Bruce, did you want to?
Yes, thank you. I've indicated, Lyndall, that I need to step out of the meeting for about half an hour, but look, I did have my hand up. Look, I just want to support the approach Amy's asked me about the term, the job description, and I've given her some feedback on how I see it. Look, I really want to encourage you in the process, the way you're going. There are a number of good folk out there. I just wanted to add a couple of comments that actually your attention should be in the selection process to somebody who is genuinely independent. So, I mean, to be clear, from my perspective, that person should not really have had any prior commitment or engagement with and connection with Environment Southland or necessarily Southport. But actually you should. You'd be very kind to agree that as an out-of-towner, I'd be your independent. I would actually recommend the value in keeping that potentially as you consider where it's at. But in terms of process, Lyndall, very comfortable. I've had a chance at the look at the terms of reference, and the focus now is to make certain we grab somebody that is genuinely independent from the organisation, so they can bring that perspective to the role. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bruce. We'll see you when you get back.
Yeah, be back soon.
Thanks. Councillor McLeod?
First, a quick question, just in regards to, did he say out of towner? So doesn't want someone got any local knowledge. Bruce, you're a local too.
I am now. I've moved into the province, so that makes me a ratepayer, actually, to be honest, Jeremy.
So, for a while, so that was look, I think not to have that connection then.
Look, I think it's important that you have a person who understands good governance, that understands good risk management, because of the discussion we've had previously about the terms of reference of the committee. Certainly has an empathy for both Southland and indeed the work of a regional council, and I would actually suggest has a strong understanding of government reform coming up, because you've got to go through a substantial change for the regional council. I think what I'm trying to reflect here, Jeremy, is don't limit yourself to what might be local. I've got no trouble. There are some good local people. I've given some names, even including locals, to Amy as potential people to approach. But my argument would be that actually don't limit yourself, is really what I'm saying, to local. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Is that clear? Councillor Robley?
While you're there, Bruce.
It's got to go.
I just wondered what role Bruce would have in this selection process, whether he's done a little bit, obviously, suggested some people, but would he be involved further as somebody, an independent person that sort of knows us and could recommend the kind of personality that might work together, work with us? Peter, have you thought about that?
Yeah, and to a certain extent, I would suggest that Bruce has already given us some feedback in that regard, and then the question would be, to his point of independence, if he has a view, is it independent or not, given that he knows us? And actually, whose decision is it? I think so. Try and get some feedback, and like I said, he's offered some names, but I'd put that question back to you, actually, councillors.
Okay, I just wonder what other people think about that. I mean, Bruce has been great. When I was here, 3 years ago and more, he was very good, I suppose. But yeah, what do other people think about that? Should he be involved or sort of, have you done enough? Linda, we might know as well as everybody.
Yeah, I think he's done enough, actually. And as you say, we greatly respect his input, and have done for a long time. So I think we need to trust the process that he's helped the staff establish. Because it's his input in the role description and the process really valuable. And,
Take it from there.
yeah, I do understand. Yeah. Chairman Horrell?
Yes, I concur with that. I think Bruce did agree to help us out till the end of the year. This decision's not going to be made before that. I'm quite happy with the process. The one thing I think possibly we should do, because Bruce, with quite a whole, he's been on a lot of work committees. Maybe worthwhile having a conversation with some of the other South Island or regional councils that are probably looking for somebody as well. We may well have somebody with a bit of stature that is prepared, as Bruce was, to do several. That means they can often bring a bit of extra flavour to a committee, but I think what we've got down here is fine, but that conversation may well, as we start to get names, be worth having, just to make sure we get the best person for the job.
Thank you. Somebody over here indicating, Councillor McFarlane.
Just the process, I was just trying to work out how are we doing our usual process, find someone, maybe I'm looking at Wilma.
Yeah.
Just to understand who's involved, or are we going outside sources?
So
Elaborate on that.
I might tag team with Amy on this one. So I think, first of all, the fact that Bruce has advised some names means that he shouldn't be on the panel. So that's, tricky. It's normal for council to do that. I think the thing is that you've got us to assist in that advice. To answer your question, yes, it's council's decision. Whether you want to have any external professional assistance around recruitment, I take Amy's advice on that. So
Look, we could or we couldn't, obviously it costs. This would be, having undertaken a similar process recently for Southport, I'd be suggesting that there are a number of people in the director space, known to institute directors, for example, that could fulfill this sort of role. Perhaps, we'd narrow that down slightly in terms of looking at local government experience. But I would be thinking that this shouldn't be a difficult selection process for us with respect to people in the market, and therefore we could go directly to recruit. Sometimes there's benefits of that in terms of branding and broader communications opportunities through recruitment, what the organisational name, as opposed to going directly with an agency. An agency perhaps can do it faster and or has people that are known to it and can support us where we are challenged from a resourcing point of view to do that. So it would be really a matter for the committee if they had a strong preference one way or the other.
So basically we sort of say, well, let's just throw it out there and see who turns up. A wee bit of that, and then if we don't feel we're not, go to the search. But because the reality is there'll be a lot of councils looking for these independents.
Number, but maybe not a lot.
Yeah.
And with respect to that, it's just, it's the type of role, and as we've seen Bruce do, that you can sit on more than one committee. So it's, despite the fact that there may be some people, some other organisations looking for similar skills, reasonably rich. And we wouldn't necessarily just throw it out there. No. Curator. It's not a person that we were looking for.
Chuck it up in the air. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? Just, yeah.
Just a couple here then, yeah, I'm sure if this is a bit of a segue, but the number 4, nominate up to 4 councillors to form a selection panel. And this is for the council to do that. Why wouldn't you have the whole of this committee doing that process, for example?
I would, so this is, I'm speaking from my recruitment experience. I'd be suggesting perhaps it's somewhat of a sledgehammer to crack a nut in terms of the effort to outcome ratio, in terms of that, not accepting the experience the chief executive had being interviewed by 13 people. And it's just reflecting the experience that we've had before, certainly when we've been, when we've been recruiting or reviewing applications for the directors for Southport. So it's just reflecting that experience that we've undertaken in the past.
So that leads me to the second part of the question is, what is the agreed process set out in number 3?
It's as per the process in the policies on page 26. So it would be going out to market as per point 3 of 2.3 on page 27. In page 28
Okay.
as well for the process.
So down there, sorry, yes, so shortlist of candidates being interviewed by a panel of all Environment Southland councillors, or just the 4 that will be selected?
I've suggested 4.
Just to throw 2 cents worth in, having been on the appointments panel with Chairman Worrell for other independent directors, that works very well, Chairman, doesn't it? The 4 on an interview panel suggest.
This is referring to the Southport process, actually.
Yeah.
So you need to take out those bits about Southport in there, aren't you?
Well, this is the policy though for it.
And then look
So
on
for this process, you don't use Southport.
no. On page 28, we talk about council will generally make its appointments, so it's an inaugural meeting, blah, 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 blah. And this is general policy on appointments. But, when we're making a decision to appoint without advertisement or to advertise a particular vacancy, you'll take into consideration the cost of any advertisement and process, availability of qualified candidates, and the urgency of the appointment. So it's a rather broadly worded policy, acknowledging that council has membership of a number of CCOs, and in fact, we will be coming to council to talk about nominations for the RSHL for next week, which has its own prescribed process. But Chairman Howell, did you have it?
Yes, well, I think the reasons that you and Amy have mentioned, it becomes a bit daunting if you've got a whole council or 7 or 8 people interviewing it. So I think that 4 is probably not a bad number. You wouldn't want more than 5. But again, it becomes the final decision will be a decision of the council using the template we've had for Southport. Normally we've gone through an agency, or the port has, but there's also the ability for people to use their own knowledge. In this case, you've got regional, obviously has a few names, so you've got a bit of flexibility there. I mean, it's probably not a massive fault of people there. So I'm reasonably comfortable. We'll come up with a list and then we can go through it and.
Yeah, well, that process, I was involved in that in the past as well. So that seemed to be, if this if that policy for the appointment of Southport directors can be basically the same for this one, but take out the references for Southport, obviously, then that will be okay.
So the recommendations are fulsome. We have reviewed role description, so is everybody okay? There are no suggested amendments to the job description and just the wording change for the recruitment processes. Number 3 is to adopt the amended job description and direct staff to undertake the agreed process. Are we clear about what that is? Yep. And number 4 is for council to nominate up to 4 councillors to form a selection panel. So that is the all 4 parts of the recommendation, which I would like somebody to move, please.
As long as I'll move 1 to 3 and then we can do the nominations. As I go through.
Well, council will do those nominations, so Chairman. So we would just be asking council to make the nomination. Very local government way of doing things, but that's plain as. Thank you. Seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Morrison. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Yay, it'd be nice to get that underway.
And we will get cracking.
Great. It's been a long time coming. All right, item 3, the annual activity plan. Oh, look, it's Amy again.
Oh, it's me again, yes. So just matters for the committee really as we set up and think about how we go forwards. And this item really refers back to some of the points that Morris brought up when we were discussing the terms of reference of the committee, and it gets a little bit more into the detail of the matters that the committee will traverse. So previously for OPAC, each meeting we had an annual activity plan, and that mapped out the agenda items that we were expecting to cover and the issues and the topics we were expecting to cover per meeting, and we had the dates of the meetings in there. We will do that going forwards. We haven't yet finalised the calendar. It's nearly done, but we haven't yet finalised the calendar for the coming year. So we will have that at our next meeting. But in the meantime, this item is really to provide an overview of the types of reporting that you can expect to see to the committee, alongside the frequency with which we will be reporting those, and just for your information, the date at which we last discussed those items. So the information is provided for reference, but also for review. Is there anything else that you would like to see that we have not covered here? Acknowledging that, you know, as and when risks emerge, we will be having that conversation with council, and it speaks to the conversation we had earlier about the dynamism of risks, and depending on what's happening in the environment, things may be more or less in focus than they might have been the previous year or the previous meeting.
So the key really is that this is a really broad, general, that nothing's set in stone yet. Councillor McPhail and then Councillor Gibson.
Thank you. Just in regards to legal risks annually, coming in, I take it that I like funding legal entities too much, but just in regards to, it just seems, you know, there could be a fair bit of pressure on with new plans and things like that. And I just think so once a year may not be, like, we'd like to know a bit more if there are risks and things coming, that legal teams and things. I know that we'll probably hear anyway, but I just don't know whether annually. I feel that's pretty quite an important.
Oh, look, absolutely, and I think the intent behind that, acknowledging that's probably a new item that we haven't, you know, in the OPAC world we hadn't traversed. I think that's more of a sort of a zooming out conversation about risk. The risk that you're talking about, absolutely acknowledge those are real life things that we are dealing with in respect of our plan changes, etc. This one will be more about actually what's happening in the legal environment and how are we going in relation to those. And there may be, and I won't be telling you, but we haven't got to the internal audit part of her role here as we're setting up the risk part, there may be an internal audit component of that as well. That we would factor into that sort of reporting. So I just want to assure the council that the timely matters of risk in relation to reform, LGA, REM, all of those good things we will be dealing with in a more timely manner, because we're well aware that those immediately impact or have the potential to impact the work that we are doing.
Councillor Gibson.
I think Councillor Morrison's comment before about putting in at the end, basically that you can consider anything covers us here. So anything that comes along can be added.
Yeah, for sure.
Makes it simple.
There are some things that we want to know are scheduled for certain times,
I understand that.
but absolutely slotting in anything else. Yeah. That's Chairman Hall.
I think it's got following on from that. I mean, the flood banks would normally be an annual, but we found we had a problem on Matara. Obviously that elevates that up and it comes through to us. So it's, we're not, you might have a schedule, but it doesn't stop us identify a risk, whether it's a legal risk or a hazard risk of it actually being dealt with at the time. So I think it comes.
Well, it also speaks to the appetite that we have to, at what level we want to hear about things, which we all need to sit down and probably recogitate.
And what I'd like to say about that is that the purpose of this committee is to ensure that you have got assurance that we have the governance arrangements in the organisation set up, the risk controls in the organisation set up, and the management controls over the quality of our work, that we've got the aspects of whatever it is covered. So while we might bring individual matters to you inside the program of work, we should be updating that information quarterly. We do have our subcommittee of this committee to deal with anything that's super urgent that we need to talk to you about in between. But the purpose is for you to have the confidence that we've got the risks covered in terms of our processes and our controls. And I think that's the most critical aspect of this committee's oversight, which is why it's separate from the Finance Committee, because of course, as councillors, you're making decisions about the money, and you also need an independent oversight of that as well. So that's what it's there for. But the actual individual matters will go into those reports.
Thank you.
And I was going to say, there is an item on there, it's about the fifth one down, organisational risk report. So that is a general organisational wide risk report, which will cover set pieces, but it will also cover those matters that Wilma has alluded to. And, she is here at this committee and provides a risk report to this committee each quarter as well. Just realised that we hadn't put that on a separate item, but probably is covered off by the organisational risk report.
I think it's there in the public.
I know, we have it as an agenda item, but just in terms of the annual activity plan.
Oh, I see it there.
Yeah, sort of that's covered in that catch-all organisational risk report.
Okay, folks, so the recommendation is to note the annual activity plan and provide any feedback, which we can. We haven't missed any additions that people were. Great. Somebody like to move that recommendation, please? Thank you, Councillor Powell. Seconded.
I'll second.
Councillor Gibson. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Next. Carried. Thank you. Item 4, risk management program update. Welcome, Tanya.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Right, so this is with pleasure. I present my first risk management program update for council. I'd suggest we take the paper as read if we can and ask if there's any questions.
Thanks, Tanya. Questions?
I don't have a question. No, we just add yeah. That would be embarrassing, wouldn't it? Just to add a little bit of commentary. So, as Tanya has alluded, this is her This is her first report, having joined the organisation in August. So as I mentioned before, that I think day 2, day 3, she was here running a workshop with Bruce for all of council on our council view of what the key strategic risks were as they saw it for the organisation. So this is the first report back of that top 10. Tania, it would be maybe helpful if you could just talk really briefly about how you've shaped this up and perhaps what the next steps are with council for this.
Yeah, sure. So as Amy just mentioned, we had a workshop, yes, very early in my tenure, and looked at what, as a council, together with the executive, we believed were potentially our top 10. What has happened since then, as I've worked closely with Bruce, Robertson is actually looking to flesh that out. So this might be our risk, but what's the cause of the risk? What are the consequences? What are the potential mitigations and controls we can put in place? And assigned an owner to those risks. That work is a big part of what we'll be discussing at the workshop with the executive on the 19th of December, and linking those risks back to our strategic objectives, as Councillor Rodway was talking about earlier. So that's a big part of that work. I'm planning on meeting with every member of the executive within the next week or so to help me understand how we link some of those risks back to our strategic objectives. But what we expect to get out of the workshop is agreement that they are our top 10 risks. We have the right owner, we have the right descriptions, we have the right controls. Because I'm relatively new to the organisation, I've taken license to make things up. So we're looking to validate a lot of that information. And from there, we will actually have a defined list of risks that will form a large part of our reporting back to this committee.
And to add to that, the intention is that each meeting will report back on a couple, 2 or 3 of those risks in detail. So we'll deep dive some of the risks as well. So then you get a level of richness around the conversation, making sure that we understand and you understand the risks to the organisation and what we're doing to manage and mitigate those, and also the risk landscape and the operating context in which those risks are.
Yes, yes, I'm looking at the page 35, where you've got this sort of table with all the pretty colours on it. It's the first one is easy for me to understand. The bottom one is a little bit more difficult. So you've got the risks down on the left-hand side. That's whether they go from rare to almost certain, and then going across from insignificant to catastrophic on the right-hand side. You've got the numbers in there. So the numbers refer to the, the numbers refer to the risks on that left. Okay. Oh, yeah. All right.
So what I'm doing is like, if you have blood being paid or whatever,
Yeah.
was the human life. So that's sort of why the colour.
Okay. So I thank you for that. Number 7 there is something that's quite interesting about central government lacking trust and confidence in the council as an organisation. This is a matter that was brought up by Local Government New Zealand in their review. And currently there's a belief, probably based on a fair bit of evidence, that there's not much, there's a lack of trust between, going both ways actually, local government not too happy with central government, like Three Waters and stuff like that, and central government similar. So that's something that's very difficult to deal with, and yet it is a high risk. Have you got any ideas on how we might deal with that as an example, I suppose, of through this process, through the process of this committee, how we might deal with something like that, which is really, a lot of it's actually out of our control to some extent.
And if I could respond, that is a lot of the work that we plan on doing on the 19th, is actually understanding what the risk is, what we do have control over. And the expectation is the ratings that we've got on these risks for the moment is the current risk rating. Once we've put in controls, if there are any, then that may change the overall rating and actually give us a residual rating, which again, as we progress, there's an expectation we'll be able to map that information for you. That may be a risk that we can't actually put any mitigations in because most of it's out of our control. But until we do that level of analysis, I couldn't say, but we do hope that there will be a presentation of information on the current risk, the mitigations and controls go in, and you'll get a residual risk. In theory, the residual risk rating should go down if we have things that we can put in to mitigate and control that risk.
Thank you.
And on that particular risk, I think there's probably two parts to it, Councillor. I think there's the one that you're talking about, which is a general view from central government in relation to the local government sector as a whole, as opposed to, say, government's view about us as an organisation. So I think that that's possibly, this is possibly more council's katoa rather than us specifically, where I think we have a very good relationship with central government, which is why we're doing a number of pilots for them. We've solved a range of issues for them, and at the moment we appear to have reasonable high levels of confidence with the ministers in relation to the work that we're doing in intensive grazing and also in Tiwa. So I think that there's probably two different matters there. So we can control the things we can control about ourselves, but you're right, we will be caught up in the broader view about the role of the sector and government's views about the sector as a whole.
I've got John and then Phil, I think.
Yeah, I quite like this this heat map below. It's probably just more a question around how live it is, and you know, we see obviously it doesn't really matter too much about stuff rolling out. But what is the policy about stuff rolling up into the red, and how quickly is the reporting done on that? Is there a policy around timeframes once that's become?
Yep, as I said, this is evolving and we're spending a lot of time workshopping with the executive. My understanding and what I would like to see is it will almost be an immediate, and that's where the emerging risks, if we have a risk sitting down a wee bit further, but it's starting to ramp up, something has happened, i.e. stock banks, that's going to be coming to the committee reasonably quickly. So it will be a live document, it will be live recording, and if things do change, we will be responding accordingly.
And can I just add that, councillors, for those of you that are new to this committee, that there is a subcommittee, which is the whole of this committee, for us to be able to come together with a smaller quorum and by Zoom if we need to deal with.
Can I just maybe ask about the ownership that you talked about earlier, Tanya, and how that relates to what John's Councillor Penderton is asking about, placing the ownership in the correct places maybe.
Yes, and that's where again I've taken a fairly new lens to the risks and thought, right, I think that actually sits with this executive team member. So that will be validated and agreed on the 19th in the workshop. And my expectation is that person, by and large, most of them will have a very good understanding of what that risk is and what their role is. And as things evolve, if emerging issues start coming through, it will be that executive member that will be taking responsibility for it and escalating it potentially through WILMA and then through to the committees.
Thanks, Tanya. Councillor Morrison.
Acknowledge that this is relatively recent and fresh work, and I would just comment that it's reassuring to see this approach being taken and being able to isolate and prioritise certain risks. So thank you for that. Just an observation in terms of the relationship from one risk to another. In some instances where one risk profile changes, it can have a cascading or knock-on effect. And in my mind, for instance, number 3 on there relating to the inability to maintain staff capacity and capability could be an example that cascades through it and changes the ratings for other risks. So I just encourage you through the workshopping process to also look to see if there's any ability to perhaps provide a commentary on how one risk might connect with others, which might shape or influence our thinking around responding to those.
Thank you.
Thanks. Chairman Laurel.
Madam Chair, probably similar vein, when you look at some of those things, 5, 6 and 7 are quite interrelated, and well, these are quite generic topics, and those top 10, we have to be aware of them. They are interrelated, but we don't want to the stage that we're too risk averse to actually do our job. As Wilma said, we've actually got quite a good relationship with central government at the moment, and that's probably from showing a bit of leadership in areas and being, flexible enough to be able to say, look, we're happy to help with the issue, and we may think there's a better way of doing things at times. But if you don't do anything, or you do too much, you're losing trust and confidence in the community. So they are all interlinked, and it's just something. Well, a lot of us could. It's a bit like standing water. Some of them we deal with that having to have a structure, but it's good to have a checks and balance list that if something suddenly emerges, and as Phil said, if you suddenly can't get key staff, then that does cascade down to your ability to react, reform, or to do the right things. Good.
Thank you. Councillor McFarlane.
Yeah, I think that I was just going to make comment on that number 7. I think there might have been comment that the council might have had lack of trust in the government too. It might have been close to that. Might have been going 2 ways. I know it's come out as the government has lack of trust down here, but I think I was just trying to understand. I remember when we went through all this, but there are obviously a lot of new councillors on board, and that's probably would be good to go over all these things to actually, because there may be other things that are popping up, and that was probably, I was going to ask a question. I think we've sort of talked about when you're reviewing these, some of these might drop off, some might, because even the first one, number 10, we might have been concerned saying, if we get a whole new council on here, how will that change? Is that going to change the direction that different influences politically? Look, we don't know. Everybody around the council might agree, happy with their long-term plan and move on. Well, that might not even need to be there. So there's something else maybe will be shifted up. I'm not saying that because it's a council one, and I'm sure there will be challenges. But certainly, I was just saying, how often do we actually check these out? Are they relevant now? Because things will change.
Look, and I just would like to reinforce that, and it speaks to the inherent nature of risk is that it's dynamic. So, we always need to just be having that lens. And as as part of the duty, like this is a risk is a thing at the moment, but actually Mary Beth Cook, who some of you might remember that we did some work with when we start with the very, 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 very start of our duty, basically was saying risk management is just management. So, whilst we're on a journey and it's all new at the moment, actually the more that we flex our risk management muscle, the more it will become part of our business as usual, and the way in which we do things, so that we've got that constant scanning and just being conscious that we're operating in a dynamic environment with risk. I think as we've seen, stuff pops up all the time that we need to attend to. So.
Thank you. I think my parting comment would be that further down the track, being able to measure the impact of our mitigations and then the next steps from that will be really important, because we can mitigate till the cows come home rather than fun. But if it's not making a significant difference, then we're not getting it right. So some kind of reporting forward for that would be great. So we have a recommendation to note the activity and progress in the report. Someone like to move those, please. Thanks, Councillor Morrison. Seconded, Councillor Rodway. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against. Carried, thank you. Thanks very much, Tanya. Keep up the good work. And that takes us to item 5, Health, Safety and Wellbeing Management System Report. Welcome Paul LaRue to the chair.
Madam Chair. Right, so as with all previous reports, I take the report as being read. Just one correction I'd just like to make to the report, just in section 3, point 3, just the correction around the newly appointed role of risk assurance and internal audit officer. It's just a correction on that role title put into the report. Just meant to read risk assurance and internal audit officer, not risk and assurance manager. Right, so I'd just like to highlight just maybe a few bits and pieces out of the report. One being COVID-19, something that seems like a lifetime ago when we last reported. It was very much a hot topic. It now seems to have faded into the background, however, still very much prevalent in our community at the moment. Once again, it's rearing its head, but just a note in the report was that we have now moved out of all of our restrictions and most of the controls around COVID-19 have now been lifted, other than a few minor bits and pieces out in the community that still need to be adhered to. Under section 2, under the emerging risks, so at the time when this report was written, we did have a incident of an individual behaving pretty aggressively towards some of our staff. And this prompted us to respond to that with an investigation into how we can better equip our staff with dealing with these particular individuals. What we are seeing is we're seeing a not necessarily increase in aggressive behavior, but most certainly an increase in intensity of behavior. So people being a lot more aggressive and quite openly being, abusive towards staff, using, bad language and threatening behavior towards staff. And this is not necessarily only face to face, but it's, via phone, via email, via just general interaction with our staff. Now, often it's cases that we are very aware of and individuals that we are aware of, but I think there's still that emerging risk of this escalating. And now that we've 2 months after this report is written, we've had our rates piece of work being done, and most certainly there's been some issues around that. So as a response, the organisation, as an organisation, we've done a bit of an investigation, pulled together a bit of a learning team to kind of assess what it is that we are doing and how we can respond to it. And some recommendations will be going to the executive as to some further controls we can put around and wrap some of these issues up in some further controls going forward. Just another piece just to note is around when we did our Avid Plus audit last year, quite a few of the findings were around the management system that we use currently. And it was pointed out that it is fairly dated now, and it's time to bring our management system, namely our documentation, up to modern times and up to spec. So the executive has approved a document structure that we can use going forward, and that was presented to the executive, as I said, and they've approved that. So that's a piece of work going forward, just to bring our documentation and so on back up to spec. Doesn't mean that what we're currently using is no longer of any use. It's still perfectly fine, but it's just bringing it up, modernizing it, and bringing it up more up to the standard to what we are currently working to at the moment. Just a little piece around health and well-being. We did our annual health checks with our SIT nurses. This is something that's been, we do this as an annual thing. And what we do is we offer it to our staff. You can go and see a nurse and they'll give you a bit of a health check It's almost like a little passport that they give you, so they're checking things like glucose and blood pressure and things like that. And it's a great indicator, and we've been doing it relatively, annually, basically, but had to cancel it for the last couple of years. So this is the first time in a while that we've actually managed to do that. So yeah, and we had a fairly good response. 42%, 42 people actually attended, and hopefully they will respond on those results that they received. Right, open to questions.
Councillor McLeod?
So the council checks, you could do the councillors. Depending on the meeting to see how the blood pressures go. And after food and blood sugars. Anyway, yeah. After that would actually be quite, we need to keep an eye on our health as well, and this council time is hugely important. So, just in regards to the obviously threats and intimidation, I'm always interested in this and seeing, are we seeing an increase? There is a lot of stress out there. And I was just going to say, I had an example in the weekend in a cafe where a couple that I've known all my life, and started, just a good conversation, say today, and turned out really agitated over this government, and I was really, really taken back, and the lady was highly agitated, not just about everything. And it really gave me a bit of an eye. Well, I knew that was out there, but it was sort of it wasn't attacking us, but it was just the whole concept of the community. And so this, you think, well, that's a one-off, but there's a lot of people like that out there after 3 years of COVID and mandating and the emissions and all these, conspiracy theorists out there too, which I would call. So it's and that we're going to be dealing with those people, and these are what I would have thought were pretty normal people in society. It's just something that's not going to go away. I don't know whether it's because these people have changed. So it was just a bit of an eye opener in the weekend. We need to be looking after employees too. That's what I'm sort of saying. That's not going to go away.
I was just going to add a broader commentary around that, and I think the Chief Executive will talk to that when she talks. But there is, when we talk about horizon and risk scanning, what we're seeing in communities are a reflection of, I think, what's going on globally around just general dissension on a number of matters, people dealing with uncertainty, and it's certainly outside of the local specific issues is an emerging risk for us as a council that we are going to need to deal with, and might manifest in different ways, not just towards aggression towards our staff, which obviously, as Paul said, we've got to have a meeting exercise around. We've got recommendations around that. It's something very much that we're keeping a close eye on. Councillor Gibson.
We're seen as a government department, I think, and what's out there at the moment, even to go and sell your house, you have to fill in forms about that thing to get it done. And people and it's protecting the 3 to 5% at the bottom that would be scandalous. And all the good ones at the top end are having to deal with it. And they've come to the end of the tether. They're all right normally, but as soon as something hits. So I don't know how the Environment Southland deals with it, but I think we've just got to back off, because sitting in a cafe, you would think life would go that long normally because blood pressure would be at a low level. It's not. And we're going to run into, if we go into a downturn, which they're trying to tell us they're manufacturing a recession, it's only going to get worse. Because nobody can trust anybody. And I think we need, as a council, probably to put a lot more effort into that and see how we can brush it over. And it may end up that it's a greater level of communication from us to our stakeholders, or to our clients, so that they understand the position that we're in. And it's not us that are doing it, but us are going to get hiding if we don't.
No. Agree.
Don't agree.
Nodding. Chairman,
That's the thing. It's
So from a staff perspective, obviously, it is, our duty to make sure that our staff are equipped with the knowledge and they're equipped with the tools to protect themselves, if anything, against these kind of interactions and so on. And, we do spend an awful amount of time in equipping our staff with that, particularly around the training side of things, most certainly around risk assessment, and then also about, using common sense and judgment, and trying to keep our staff, in the forefront of what is happening out there. So, highlighting potential areas where there's going to be, potential conflict. Now that's protecting our staff. Obviously the other layer of protection is what you will do as a council, and guiding us and making sure that whatever we're doing as a council, is not having the same impacts on the community and escalating those levels of tension and so on. So yes, we do lean on the council a bit to protect us a bit in that space. But as an organisation, we do have that commitment to protect our staff and try and look after our staff as much as possible in that space.
So we need to be doing that as the overall umbrella to protect staff.
Yeah.
And our image and our reputation image.
Councillor, I've got Chairman Horrell and then a couple of questions from me.
Yes, I was just listening to the conversation and of course half answered it is that women at this heightened risk, in this case more aggressive clientele, what have we put in place? Are we giving a bit of training on, it's a bit like the old traffic on the road. Some of them, the manner is you think, oh, that's fine. Some of them, their opening comments wind people up. It's just, there's ways of doing things that probably help keep people calm. The other one I was looking at, and I have looked at it before, is the vehicles with the checks for fire extinguishers, etc. Chairman's Guard's never had one in my knowledge. I'm not sure if that's an oversight or whether it's just a staff thing.
Don't worry about it. How do you follow that? Thank you, Chairman. Two quick, well, one quick, one not so quick. The EAP that's available to staff, is that also available to councillors, given Councillor McPhail's experience in the cafe, for example? Is the EAP available for councillors should be needed?
I don't see why not.
Great. So how would we go about doing that if we needed it?
We will make those details available. There's an I-100 number, and we also have Tyrian Cafe, not cafe, in the building on Friday, which is round and drop-ins.
Just in case anybody feels they need
we'll make
support somehow.
information available.
It's confidential and all that stuff. My second one's a slightly, I'm not sure it's a question actually, Paul, but your emerging health and safety risks are kind of the bottom of the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff for what happens to minimising catch at the bottom, sort of. But kind of speaking to what the other councillors were saying about how are we able to, are we looking at how we can preempt some of the challenges with the communications and with the interactions so that we're minimising the risks, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's a broad question because there's so many arms to that particular risk scenario, and I think if I'm looking at it from a on the ground perspective, most certainly there's always discussion and it can be frustrating to some staff members in particular when we're trying to communicate something out that has an impact to the public and so on, how much it gets, it goes around the organisation so many times just to make 100% sure whatever we're saying is not going to be provocative in some way or other. So, so even just using that as an example, just on how we communicate and stuff, it does go through a lot of a lot of hands, a lot of eyes, and yes, we sometimes do make mistakes and we do sometimes stumble on something, but generally speaking, you know, there's always that sense that whatever we're going to say could have an impact on our staff and on our teams working out there. So, you know, if we make a decision and say something about it, you know, it most certainly gets given that due diligence. That's, you know, I'm confident around that. You know, I think we're all aware of the fast moving world we're living in at the moment. And a lot of these things are fairly reactive. So, you know, they're coming at us pretty fast and furiously. And, you know, we have to be quite reactive to it. But, you know, I'm fairly confident to say that as an organization, when it comes to making decisions and you know, and I'll just use an example, you know, when we went to talk about our flood banks and some of the issues that were picked up, you know, the amount of energy that was put in to make sure that when we went to our community and spent time in our community discussing this, we put enough controls around it to wrap our staff around with the assurance that they, you know, had adequate health and safety plans provided to them to actually go out into the community and do these talks and so on. So, you know, it's always something on the forefront. I'm not sure that answers your question, but, you know, there's most certainly a heightened level of assuring ourselves that we are doing as much as possible to protect our staff. And, you know, unfortunately, there's always those scenarios, you know, you never know when you pick up a telephone, who's on the other end of the line. And, you know, that for me is really scary. And knowing that someone could just, you know, go and at least you have the opportunity to put the phone down. But, you know, someone walking onto someone's property or visiting someone, or even like you walking into the community and someone just, you know, having a tirade at you and attacking you for no reason whatsoever.
Thanks, Paul. And as a response from Amy and then Councillor Pemberton.
Yeah, and just to add to what Paul's saying and to link back to some of the things that Tanya was talking about, you know, when we have risks like that, we've got our controls that we can wrap around the causal factors, and then we've got our controls or mitigations that we wrap around the consequences. So the upfront controls or mitigations that we try and put around things are to make sure that people are doing their risk assessments before they go out, to make sure that people have been trained, you know, to make sure that they've got the communications and the messages, all of those things we try and do up front, so people have got the skills, knowledge and information to deal with as much as they can what will end up being a dynamic situation. Sometimes the sheer act of rocking up onto someone's property before you even open your mouth and say anything, you've already set a whole chain in motion, which you actually, you know, is a dynamic situation. So making sure up front that the people have the training skills and knowledge to deal with as best they can, whatever might present themselves. You know, we're really clear, particularly in manners of aggression towards staff. You know, people have permission to put down the phone, to walk away, to remove themselves from the situation. So we're really clear about trying to manage that. And should staff unfortunately be the victim of a verbal aggression or assault, or, you know, fortunately, touch wood, we haven't had any physical ones in my memory, but, you know, those threats, then we have the EAP to support in the background. And we do those learning reviews, exercise, incident investigations to make sure that we've got the learnings that we capture as a result of those and share those through the staff. That's what Pemberton.
I'm sure it's already been asked before. I guess the fact that a fair chunk of the clientele are rural, the support your training giving staff is stuff that's been rolled out through the rural sector. Just communications quite different in the rural sector sometimes, and how people approach things, like, you know, simple things like the good yarn workshops and things like that type of thing has been rolled out through staff, and actually to a point whether that should be rolled out through council too, to be honest. I feel that those sort of tools that we can learn really help with good engagement and resolving things before they come to a head.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, we do have we have staff that come from a rural background, and you know, they often act as the mentor in some of those situations. And you are right, yes, there are always further opportunities to enlighten and give the staff the right sort of support around having those discussions with the rural community. Absolutely. And I think we've gone a long ways thus far, but there's still always room for improvement. I certainly acknowledge that. And further opportunity.
Finally, Councillor
I
McLeod.
was just going to clarify that these couple that I wanted, they're just visibly upset towards the government and rules and everything at the moment. It's just, it's been an overload. So it wasn't like they were picking on Environment South and that such. So I just want to clarify that, just to make sure that, hey, they're all attacking us or anything. And it is actually saying, I felt like I just want to sit down with them for a while and see where they're getting, why they've got to this stage. So know them more, and just that it is, and this is going around in the community, but also just probably from how we, give a heads up in the rural community. Interest rates have doubled in the last year, basically. Farming's, there's some interesting dynamics going on there, costs and everything. You might see big payouts, but it's all been sucked out. Nothing's changed year to year, but it's even from a compliance, just reviewing maybe, they talk about, we give them half an hour, we turn up, or give them a phone call. You just take consideration. Is it better to inform them a bit better for your safety of the people who are going to be turning up on their doorstep over an incident? There's that balance of just putting it out there. There is stress in the system, and you might just hit the wrong person. Not saying we've got to do our job. We just need to understand community.
Yeah, and and that's constantly being considered, particularly after an incident. So usually the team would get together and have a little bit of debrief and so on. So I'll just use an example of where we hadn't, and it's actually referred to in this report, was the interaction with a particular individual that was particularly abusive to our staff. And one of the key learnings was that we were using the opportunity to, unbeknownst to us that this person was going to be particularly aggressive, went to go and visit the property and had several people there that were, new staff, and we used it as a training opportunity. Soon realized that, how intimidating is that to be approached by 4 environmental staff members? Is that a trigger in itself? And most certainly a lesson learned for us was, when we attending something that could be provocative or could be, lead to something, is it a good idea to be sending 4 people versus 2 or whatever? So, learning from those experiences, absolutely.
Thanks. So I think probably some of this conversation is actually a wider organisational conversation, specifically Paul's. But thanks very much for your input. Did I read somewhere that reporting of near misses is down a wee bit? Or am I imagining?
Yes, yep. So we have, previous reports spoke about, near misses down on reporting as such, but I'm pleased to say we've had quite a bit of near miss reporting over the last 3 or 4 months. So definitely trying to keep that momentum going is going to be the challenge going forward. But most certainly there's been an increase in our near miss reporting, which is always good.
Excellent, thank you. So recommendation, please, to note the report.
Second.
Chairman Horrell, seconded to Councillor Rodway. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thanks very much, Paul. That takes us to moving into public excluded for the remainder of the meeting. Jan, would you like to give us the reasons, please?
Moving into public excluded to confirm the minutes of the 28th of September's meeting and to deal with item 6, divisional update, item 7, cyber security, item 8, economic recovery projects, and item 9, overview, governance level risk management. The reasons are to carry on without prejudice or disadvantage negotiations, including commercial and industrial, and to prevent the disclosure or use of official information for improper gain or advantage.
Thanks, James. Somebody like to make that, please? Thank you, Councillor McLeod, seconded Chairman Horrell. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye.